Had pretty good input from last week's episode about my grandfather, so I thought I'd go maybe a little bit more depth into my grandfather about who he was and his own story, and include my grandmother as well. Two very different people, and hopefully today we'll capture that here a little bit. So this is a story of my grandfather that he told to my mother. Again, this is W.J. Fisher, William John Fisher, Bill Fisher, and he told the story shortly before his death. So I'm just gonna read it. As I become older and times change, I realize my life was unique in ways. There are events that only I can tell about. So I've decided to put some of the things that have been important to me and Edna down on paper. Edna, obviously, is my grandmother. I was born William John Fisher on April 22nd, 1913, in our home in Llewellyn, Nebraska, the oldest of 9 children. I attended school in Llewellyn until I was 12 years old. At that time, my father, Christian Carl, and my mother, Mary Berglund, bought 160 acres of irrigated farm land at Belmar, Nebraska. I later became aware it was to get us boys out of town. My father had never farmed and never did even after we got the farm. Dad came to America from Germany in 1900 and carpentered. My uncle Frank Berglund was hired to work the farm and show us boys how to farm. 2 years later, Frank married, rented a farm, and left us. We Fisher boys decided we could do the farming by ourselves. We were young. I was 14. Albert was 12 and a half, and Ernest was about 8. Dad said we could have all the horses we needed, and after we got the farm work done, we could have all that we earned by working out. At first, we picked corn by hand for neighbors at 7 cents a bushel. We put 4 horses on a Fresno, which is a dirt mover drag, and cleaned the main ditch of our alfalfa irrigation ditch as needed. The 20-mile main ditch had numerous sand draws that had drained across the ditch north to the Platte River. These draws were washed out after a hard rain, and the Fisher boys always had the horses and the time to fix those washouts. We were paid 65 cents an hour. That later went to $1 an hour for the 4 horses and a man. We were paid with a ditch warrant that drew 6% interest. These ditch warrants were called in and paid many years later, depending on the economy. That was our first lesson in economics. That was when my brothers Albert and Ernest and I started working together. We never thought of it as a partnership, but we continued working together until my brothers came home from their service after World War II. We boys and Uncle Charlie Berglund rented the Sudman quarter section 7 miles east of Llewellyn and divided the corn and hauled it home by team, where we fed some hogs and cattle. In 1930, so he would have been 17 in 1930. In 1930, I went to work for Newt Nielsen on the Doherty Ranch and stayed 4 years. I learned ranching from Newt. My job was to feed fat cattle 7 days a week. Usually twice a year, I got a break from routine when Newt sold cattle and shipped them to Omaha. I got to make the trip on a drover's pass. That was quite a deal for a young fellow like me. I stayed at the Castle Hotel, where all the other stockmen stayed in those days. I quit Newt Nielsen in the spring of 1934, and we boys rented the Barber farm of about 1,000 acres of good irrigated farmland. We bought one F-20 McCormick tractor and did the rest with horses. We farmed corn and alfalfa. We had one of the few rubber-tired tractors. We farmed 24 hours a day. In the fall of 1936, so he would have been 23. In the fall of of 1936, I went to Dalhart, Texas, and bought 162 good old Hereford cows from Gus Coots for $51, delivered to the Ruthven Stockyards. We railed him home thanks to SP Delatour. Now, I think it's Delatour now that I look at it, but I've said Delatour in the previous podcast, whatever. So SP's son, Ben, was our banker in Llewellyn. SP went every fall to Texas and bought a trainload of mostly yearling steers to his Llewellyn ranch. He sold 2-year-old steers in Omaha and moved them all by rail. SP told me to buy a Union Pacific chair car ticket to Denver, to Raton, New Mexico on the Colorado and Southern, and then on to Dalhart, Texas by the Southern Santa Fe. And to get receipts for all, he would be waiting for me and would find some cows I could see. If I decided not to buy, I could have the trip anyway and get my ticket back by driving on the Drover's Pass with him back home. I did buy 162 cows that were a foundation of our herd of Hereford cows that we have today. Now, again, this was told in 1986, and things have changed in genetics at the Sunny Slope and Powderhorn ranches. But anyway, we have not bought any Hereford cows since. SP was a railroader. He wanted those cattle loaded at Romero, Texas at 4 p.m. He said he could hold up the Union Pacific RO, which is the rush order train, to Omaha for 1 hour in Denver from 11 p.m. to midnight. And the Union Pacific would have to switch the engine at North Platte to take us back to Llewellyn. So in other words, he had to go east to get west. When we were pulling up the mountains north of Pueblo, Colorado, SP was stewing. He thought that, and SP Delatour, to give context, at this time would have been, I think, probably 80-ish years old, but he was along for all this. When we were pulling up the mountains north of, he was stewing, he thought he would not make it to Denver and we would miss the RO train. The conductor put a note on the stick at a little station for help, and pretty soon an extra engine came behind us and pushed us north over the mountains, and we made our rush order in Denver. Our rush order in Denver. We made the whole trip in 32 hours and did not have to stop for feed or water. 36 hours was the railroad limit for cattle to travel without food and water. At that time, the Union Pacific RO stopped at North Platte to pick up stock that came down the North Platte River and went on to Omaha nonstop for the market the next morning at 8 a.m. Some people held cattle over in Omaha 21 hours for a rest and fill before the next day's market. That was our feeder market until we moved to the ranch south of Valentine. So I remember him telling me about that, shipping cattle to Omaha, and then they had to actually drive them to the stockyards. And so he told me about doing that in the 1930s. And he told me they drove down Dodge Street, but that doesn't seem right, because I don't think the train station was, not sure where it was, but he definitely drove cattle in the streets of Omaha from the train station to the livestock market. From 1935 to 1940, the Central Public Power and Irrigation System was building the dam to make Lake McConaughey. The district condemned the Barber place. They set their own price and took it. Frank Barber fought them in vain. We thought that would be the end of our farming there, so I scouted for land in the Sandhills for Frank Barber. We bought the Sunny Slope and moved there in the spring of 1941. Frank never did to see the ranch due to his failing health, and I know that Frank Barber, because he was my great-grandfather, I know that he died at the end of 1940, so he commissioned his son-in-law, Bill Fischer, to buy this ranch, but he never saw the thing. Highway 83 was not even there yet, and there were no pot trucks to haul the cattle. The drive took 21 days. Now, in our previous stories, we said 20, but 21 days, and we moved the cattle at a very little cost with 5 riders, one six-horse team, and one 2-wheel pickup cook wagon. And listeners, if you hadn't heard the story, check out the podcast before this one, because we tell the story of that 20-day drive. It's quite a story. I had been seeing Edna some. He's talking about Frank Barber's daughter, Edna, when I went to Lincoln to report to Frank Barber on our ranching operation. Sometimes I picked her up in McCook, where she taught school, and gave her a ride home to Lincoln. On June 5th, 1941, Edna Barber and I were married in Yankton, South Dakota by a Presbyterian minister. Now, this is interesting because my grandma remembers them being married in Hartington, Nebraska, and Granddad remembers Yankton. And we haven't, my Aunt Nadine, I think, tried to find a marriage license or certificate, and we never were able to get that. So it's a mystery as to where my grandparents were married. It was either Hartington, Nebraska, or Yankton, South Dakota. We returned to Sunny Slope, where we started our married life in a 2-room cookhouse with our trail camp gear. So let's stop there for a second and think about that. That's all they had, is whatever they had on that cattle drive to start their life. We lived in that cookhouse for 8 years. Edna fed 8 men 7 days a week. I'm going to repeat that, folks. My grandmother fed 8 men 7 days a week. They bunked in a big house, which also served as the wash house. We usually hired a girl to help Edna. JB and Nadine were born while we lived in that house. Again, listeners, JB would be my father. We used coal oil wick lamps for light until we got a 1,500-watt Kohler propane motor on a generator hooked to a light plant. In those days, Sandhillers usually used 32-volt appliances and wind chargers. We saw the change coming and bought a 5,000-watt WIT diesel motor and used that with 110-volt appliances until REA came in 1952. Now, REA would be Rural Electrical, Association, but that's what he's talking about, REA. The electric lines. It came in 1952. We called that old setup Old Thumper because you could hear it turning over, thump, 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 thump. We had no phone at first. In fact, when JB was born, our neighbor Bus Harms rode horseback to relay the message to me. The Simeon community had a barbed wire phone, but it didn't go to Valentine. It originally went to Wood Lake. In the mid-1950s, the telephone office out of Valentine recommended that the ranchers hook the barbed wire phone line onto the 2-line system from the Brandeis Ranch to Valentine. Only one neighbor, J.O. Harms, had hooked on. The community wanted a better system, so the office manager from Valentine helped organize a phone company for the Simeon community. We figured it would cost the equivalent of 2 dry cows per person, plus labor, to put in the phone. The community pitched in and built the line. We paid Northwestern Bell pole rent, and Bell paid for the wire from L.C. Beals on the Brandeis Ranch. The Simeon people built their own branch lines off the main line and did their own maintenance to Valentine for years. It was a 13-party line, and since neighbors hadn't enjoyed the luxury of being able to visit on the phone before, it was usually busy. An agreement was reached whereby a person needed to use the line for business to push the phone cradle up and down on a business call. Neighbor ladies visiting on the phone were heard to say upon hearing impatient clicking, "Oh, it's Bill again, wanting the phone. Talk to you later." So again, listeners, if you don't know what a party phone is, we had one at Powderhorn Ranch. You actually identified who was you'd ever hear everybody's phone ring. So it was based on, you'd answer the phone based on your ring identification. And so at the Powderhorn Ranch, it was 2 short rings. If the phone went ring, ring, that we knew it was for us. But if it went 2 long rings, it was for someone else, or 1 long ring, etc. But everybody could pick up the phone and hear what everybody else was doing. So those were the times for the party lines. Our little 2-room house wasn't the warmest place in the winter. Occasionally, Edna wore boots and a coat in the house to keep warm. So one winter, when it got cold enough to freeze water inside the house, Edna complained. She was a little surprised when I found the solution to the problem. I bunked the house with manure, thereby insulating it. It worked. Cowboys, not eggheads. To add a little personality to the house, one summer Edna took up on a whim and painted the front door red. She said she knew she couldn't hurt anything, and it satisfied her desire to do something to spruce up the little house. We never worried about being in that house because she knew it wasn't permanent, that we'd build a new house eventually. Mail came 6 times a week to the Simeon post office, which was in the Daniels home 2 miles south of the Sunny Slope. Later, when roads were better, the mailbox was at Les Harm's place, a little bit better, or a little less than 2 miles on a better road. The mail was on a star route. That meant that the postman delivered groceries, parts, or whatever was needed. We would call into Valentine by 8 a.m. and the postman delivered our needs by 12 noon for a small fee. So isn't that something? Back in the 1940s, 50s, that was their little Amazon. That was their little FedEx. They called by 8 a.m. and by God, they got it by noon sometimes. Pretty cool story. At times in the spring, the Gordon Creek got wild and woolly, making travel very difficult. During several of the early years, we had a hard time getting to town to get supplies. Our neighbor, Bus Harms, used his pack horse to help us out. He could load 2 cream cans full of cream on a horse and ride to Harold Harms' place, where he could go, by pickup to town. He sold the cream and bought groceries to fill 2 empty cream cans. Then he would return to Harold's to get the horse, pack the cream can, and swim the cans across the Gordon Creek, so that we had supplies. Now there's dams up and down the creek to divert water to meadows and save the bridge. Our roads weren't so good. When Highway 83 was built across the bird refuge, the refuge wouldn't give additional right-of-way for a road to our area unless the road would be built up right around the refuge headquarters. That wasn't done, so the Simeon community collected money to build 16B for 5 miles. It's still there, listeners. Harold Harms, P.H. Young, and others and I bought 1 lane on up from 16B, where the schoolhouse is, to the now mailbox at Les Harms. Cherry County built the grade, and the neighbors had Kiewit built the road on top. Omaha listeners, you understand what Kiewit is. We hayed the shoulders and built the fence. When World War II was on, Albert and Ernest, that's his brothers, went to the service in the Pacific Theater. So Edna and I operated the Sunny Slope and the Barber Place for 5 years until the boys got back. The Tri-County never did put water on most of the Barber Place, and Ernest farms it yet today. Ernest, this is 1986. Ernest since passed away. It's been deceased for many years. Edna and I put the Hudson hay, Hudson would be their neighbors, up for, we're talking about very lush meadows in the Sandhills. I personally hayed that ground up there for many years myself. But Ed and I put the Hudson hay for 19 years, as well as other neighbors' hay during the war years and later. We figured we'd put the Sunny Slope hay up with our own hands. We took in enough for the expenses of haying. Work was done mostly with horses and some tractors at first. We sold our last workhorses in the early 1950s. We worked hard, but we were getting ahead and enjoyed every bit of it. We bought the Sunny Slope from the Barber estate in 1945 and built a new home in 1949. We added the Schlegel pasture in 1956. We have since, the Sunny Slope no longer has a Schlegel, but anyway, that was on the Schlegel Creek with great trout fishing. But anyway, The powder horn was purchased in 1958, and the Barnes place was added in 1968, and that's where I was born and raised, the Powder Horn Ranch. In 1972, we bought 866 Angus cows from Tom Arnold and 866 animal units of National Forest land lease with them. The Powder Horn Reserve and the Arnold Reserve were put together and divided in half going to Sunny Slope and half going to the Powder Horn. The Presbyterian Church in Valentine has played an important part in both Edna's and my life. Edna served as a deacon in the Women's Association, and I was on the session and the other committees of the church. We enjoyed a wonderful trip to the Holy Land with friends from the church. The church has been a great comfort to us over the years, and me especially since Edna's passing of April of 1984. I appreciate that my father and mother taught all their children how to work and how to save. It was a lesson that made all the difference in my life. So that's the story that he told. A couple other things that I'm going to include in today's podcast. That is, I have a program that was given at the Eastern Star in 1971 to honor both Bill and Edna. So we're going to get a little bit into Edna Barber a little bit here as well. So this is told in not the first person, but the third person. It all began near Llewellyn, Nebraska, where both Edna and Bill's parents were pioneer homesteaders. Edna, you were the youngest of 4 children, born to Frank and Carrie Barber. Your father, Frank, was a real roughhousing cowboy and adventurer. He drove cattle for the Army from Oglala to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation to provide the Indians with the treaty-guaranteed meat. Edna has always said that Frank liked a good, hot argument. So Frank Barber, my great-grandfather, from all the stories I understand, and one of his colleagues or one of his friends was Buffalo Bill Cody, but he was just flat out a badass. I would have liked to have met the guy. Now, on the other hand, my great-grandmother, and so they're talking about Edna Barber, I'll go back to the story. Your mother, Carrie, led a very hard life of a pioneer woman on the homestead near Llewellyn while your father was off and off on a venture. You were about 5 years old. When you were about 5 years old, your family moved to North Platte so that you and your brother Cecil could go to school. When you were little, you used to wonder, and I will make note that my grandmother Edna was the only of their 4 children in her family. She was the only one that was not born in a sod house. Sorry, I keep getting off these tangents. When you were little, you used to wonder what to put on school questionnaires that asked your father's occupation, since he was older and retired during your school years. So you asked him about it, and he said, you tell them your father's a dirt farmer and proud of it. Edna, we were told that you have very fond memories of living in North Platte as a little girl, when North Platte was a rootin' tootin' rail center. With the Barnum Bailey circuses coming to town, etc., North Platte was considered rather cultural since it sat on a throughway. And if you listeners probably know, North Platte, Nebraska to this day is a big railroad town. When you were still small, your adventurous father took his family and was joined by another family on a cross-country trip to California. There were no highways or tourist facilities, and family used the Blue Book as a guide. Its directions were in terms of 2 miles south of the 2 crisscrossed fallen oak trees is a windmill. Turn west and travel until you reach a white church. 3 miles west of the church is a town. There will be, etc., etc. It was an exciting gypsy adventure, and evidently the people you passed along the way thought you were gypsies. Edna, your days at North Platte were busy, active times. You were elected to serve as Honor Queen of Bethel number 2 of Job's Daughters. Job's Daughters. Is it Job's Daughters? I'm a Mason, I should know that. You attended the University of Nebraska and one term at Columbia University in New York, and earned your bachelor's and master's degrees in education. You taught high school business courses in Valparaiso, McCook, and Kearney. Sidebar: we recently found a school, I don't know, diary that she kept when her first year as a teacher in Valparaiso, Nebraska, is in the 1920s, late 1920s, and it was very detailed. And it's one of those things like, what are we going to do with this? And I donated it to Valparaiso Public Schools. I think they were pretty pleased with it because there's a lot of history there. So it's no longer Valparaiso. It's can't think of the name of the is it Conestoga? Sorry. Anyway, onward. Billy, you attended kindergarten in a pumpkin house, so named because it was used to display pumpkins at fair time in the summer. Later, you were apprenticed to your father to learn carpentry, but left home when you were 14 to pursue your lifelong dream to become a cowboy. Again, my grandfather had an 8th grade education, but one of the smarter guys I knew. Edna, you quit your teaching much to the dismay of your colleagues. They thought you were really cutting yourself off from humanity when you announced your plans to marry Bill and move to the Sandhills to make your home. Edna, when the first baby was due to arrive in May of 1943, you went to stay in Lincoln with your mother so that you'd be near the hospital. Now, let's give this context. Grandma was born, I think, in 1905, so she was 38 when she had her first child, and that was my dad. So John Barber Fisher was born May 26, 1943 at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Lincoln. Bill, the day JB was born, started out at home for you just like any other day. So he was, 300 miles away from Lincoln on the Sunny Slope Ranch. You were moving cattle across the Snake River. Your horse fell in the river with you, both coming and going, and you were so when he went across the river, it fell in the river, and when he came back across, it fell in the river, it's not fun. Both coming and going, you were a wet, disgruntled cowboy when your neighbor J.O. Harms drove over to tell you that they had received a phone call from Lincoln to tell you you were a father of a bouncing baby boy. And again, that would be my father, J.B. Fisher. And then Edna, you took J.B. with you to Lincoln again as you were expecting a second child in 1948. So she would have been in her 40s. Nadine was born on December 14th, 1948. When you brought Nadine home from the hospital, it was nearly Christmas, so you put the baby under the Christmas tree. Imagine her brothers, JB's the second one, find a little baby sister under the Christmas tree from Santa Claus. By the time mother and child were ready to travel, the early winter blizzard of 1940 was set. It would set in, and then you all can go check the history of that. And JB was enrolled in kindergarten in Lincoln, which I did not know until I just read this, honestly. And so they waited for the snow melt until the roads were cleared so they could go back to Valentine. And then August 14th of 1950, which is today, August 14th, 75 years ago today, a second son, Bruce, was born in Lincoln, which again, my grandma would have been 45 years old. And again, that's something back. It's something now, but back then with the medical technology, it's really something. So happy birthday, Uncle Bruce. He was the third child of Bill and Edna Fisher. I'm just going to conclude today's podcast by some notes that my Aunt Nadine had that my nephew Jack McHenry, and see one of our earlier podcasts, Jack McHenry and Sam Fisher are the only two grandsons of Bill Fisher who didn't go into ranching. Isn't that something? A couple eggheads. But this was some notes that Jack had given me, and this is just from Nadine's words. She said she was my Aunt Nadine was an artist, actually a renowned artist, Nadine McHenry. Check her out. You can Google her too. But as I'm working on this painting today, some of the things my dad used to say keep popping up in my mind. He could sound pretty rough around the edges, but he was honest, hardworking, and a man with a lot of heart. Some things my dad would say. I'm just a poor cowboy trying to earn a living. Someone here has to stay home and run the ranch. We've heard that before. Those goddamn sons of bitches are too dumb to piss. I can't read it. Those goddamn sons of bitches are too dumb to pour piss out of a boot. Usually referring to government workers or anyone who worked in office. In other words, eggheads. He doesn't work for a living. He's just a goddamn pencil pusher. Again, most often referring to government workers or eggheads. That stupid son of a bitch, that could refer to anyone, including his children. I always say it's too bad everyone can't be nice like me and Mom and let it go at that. That sounds exactly like something that I remember him saying. That's a crime. Jesus Christ himself wouldn't put up with that. And finally, I always say, call a spade a spade. Now, just for counterbalance, here's some of the things that my grandma Edna used to say that my Aunt Nadine remembered. You've got to make your own good times. Life is full of adjustments. It's just one adjustment after another. So true. So true. Bill, don't swear. Swear, swear, swear. That's all I ever hear. Have fun while you can. One should never dwell on things too much. Stand tall and hold your head high. Thanks for tuning in, listeners. I hope you found that as interesting as I do. I'm clearly very proud to come from the family that I do.